But the point being, that has to be challenged, because as you said, about that, good people allowing bad things to happen and saying nothing.
Well, the judge actually in the robocalls actually found that they were guilty, but
Yes.
didn't overturn them.
But that's not the
decision.
conservatives, that's not the media spin that the
Yeah.
conservatives put out.
Yeah.
And,
But the judge wouldn't overturn the elections. Which they should have.
Because of restrictions in the law.
Yeah, and it's often our law. Sometimes it can be used and definitely can be misused. And media, there's a saying now that you need 7 good stories for 1 bad one, and it used to be 3 to 1. We have a problem in our end of town because of stereotyping, so you're always constantly going, against that. The media was actually pretty good with me, but I do know the media have changed their roles. They no longer report. They find something controversial. And I know even when I was on council, they always went after certain ones,
Yeah.
certain individuals. And some of those individuals would walk out and speed dial the media. And the media didn't even have to work for it. And so the media almost has to clean up their own act, and I don't know how.
They really
and I
do.
know some people have tried, but
Even in our cannabis community, all they ask for is, well, can you get somebody to smoke a joint? We want that on camera. What does that have to do with our story?
Yeah.
It's not about out there smoking cannabis. It's about education and facts. Like, they like to always twist it. And I won't even talk to the media. My husband's here, he's got years of experience. Because if you don't know how to answer them, they spit it on you.
yeah. And I never could write. I could never talk in bites, which is of course what they want.
Yeah.
I want to give them the whole thing. I'm going to inform you.
Exactly.
I would agree with that, because there's something that has been bugging me that over the last couple of years, in-camera meetings where people aren't held accountable, or representatives are not held accountable for what the discussion is, what their vote is. And I think that's something that needs to be restricted. I can understand it for highly sensitive, something that is to nation's security, but they're not using it like that. I think that's something that needs to be addressed and reduced, so that people do know what's going on.
It's kind of different. I served the 2 terms in council, and we basically were in camera for 2 things. One was the sale of NMAX at the time, so we were given some confidential information. And secondly was if you were hiring the manager, city manager. And you know something? And I think one other time we were in when there was the fiasco with East Village when they went through. So 3 times we were in camera. And those were all super confidential, but on a percentage, that might have been 2% of our time.
You talking about recall to me? You're talking about, you want to see a system where your elected representative could be called back if they seem to be disagreeing with?
No, just that their votes they're held accountable in all these committees that they join. They like having their titles in the committees and on their resume, but when it comes to seeing what they're talking about, what they're voting on, what they're voting for, what they're voting against, that information isn't out there. And they could be voting on the most mundane things,
Yeah.
and it seems they can be in camera.
The vote is actually, when you come out of in camera, you actually, the vote is actually taken in council, in public. And the vote is supposed to match what you've done in camera. But I will tell you that they tried to coerce me to vote, so it was a unanimous vote. And I wouldn't, so in council, I voted against the council. But there is you are coerced to vote unanimously in anything that's in camera.
Depends a little bit on your media. I get a number of papers, maybe it's because of political fixation around province. But for instance, the paper that reports on what do you call it, municipal area, between here and Cochrane and around to Airdrie.
Wild Rose.
The county?
Huh?
The county? Oh, the Wild Rose or
Yeah,
Rocky View?
Rocky View.
Rocky View.
Rocky View, yeah.
That's it,
Yeah.
If
Rocky
you
View.
read Rocky View there, it has the aldermanic vote each week, right, every time they have a meeting there, who voted which way on each issue. So I think that's a large part to do with the media. When you criticize the media, you gotta remember that the media is what we make it. The media makes a living selling ads. And they sell ads that tickle our fancy. So when they write today about everything being conflict, you know, the A said this and B said that, that's because we're dumb enough to follow it. So it's so easy to say it's all the fault of the media, but the media is only doing what we ask them to do, which is that Chicago News type of thing where they talk about man bites dog or dog bites or man makes love to men. That doesn't change even, you know, anything that'll catch a headline. And we buy the papers. If we didn't buy the papers, if we didn't make such a fuss over this, they're reporting conflict, they change because the media doesn't have a personality of themselves, of their own. They're nothing but a reflection of us. And I think once we realize that, and they realize that we realize that, the reporting is different. But I mentioned that one out of town because that is a case of reporting meetings and how each vote.
Mhm.
And they'll say, the other one that does it is, you know where Smoky Lake is, northeast of Edmonton?
Yeah.
Where Deborah Gray used to represent them. I can still get there weekly. They report council meetings as a rural council and the arguments and the vote.
We'd take up a
People
whole
buy-
page though in
Pardon?
city. We'd take up a whole page in the city one.
Yeah, well, see, those areas, interestingly enough, if you are a ratepayer or a taxpayer, you have property, that automatically goes to the newspaper. In other words, you've bought it a subscription whether you like it or not, because
yeah.
it's on your property taxes. And at first it kind of brasses you off, why the hell should you be paying your property taxes, you know, mine's just only $10, $15 a year. Why should you be paying for it? But it makes a difference.
Yeah.
The paper reports.
This is the Rocky View paper.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about
Oh,
the one,
In Peace River.
well, there's
In-
two. There's the Bow Island Commentator, if you don't know where that is, down near Cyprus, or down in Medicine Hat. They take a charge on the taxpayers. And the other is the Smoky Lake. I get a great kick out of reading weekly papers. They're much more interesting than
Geez, if the
Yeah,
Herald
paper.
could convince Calgarians to do that.
well, they might.
That would be
Might,
different.
Yeah, they might.
Could I put
But I just mentioned that. Pardon?
just a small spin on your, about the media and whatnot. My understanding is in the mid-70s, late 70s, somewhere in there, papers up to that time have been much more independent and owned by smaller bodies of people, smaller financial interests. And it was decided at some kind of a meeting or whatever, Northern meeting, that major corporations in the United States decided that they were going to try and start to influence public opinion more by buying newspapers. So there was a concerted effort to start to buy newspapers. And when that happened, and for the years afterwards, up to now, the papers have taken a definite turn to the right in terms of the way they report things. More often than not, the Calgary Herald's reporting will take a right slant on things, not a left slant on things. And the National Post is totally hopeless. I mean, the National Post's purpose, in my mind, is to keep Harper in power as long as possible. I mean, the reporting is so biased, it's not even funny. It's ridiculous.
But they don't pretend to be anything more than what they are, though. They're a little over to the right of Hitler, and they're proud of it. And that's why they put it out. And you don't want to read that type of thing, you don't buy it.
And it was
But they
interesting.
make
I don't-
they make no apology at all for being the mouthpiece for big business.
But a lot of people don't realize the bias that paper has.
Oh.
They buy the paper thinking that this is more true or
Yeah.
representational than it really is.
I actually, when I talked to them once about the bias, and they just says, no, there isn't. We have this columnist and this columnist, you know, and I said, yeah, but I'm so mad at that columnist, I don't read it, you know, so I, you know.
As you
so-
mentioned, Financial Post, you have a left-wing columnist who writes about once every 6 weeks. And you have a right-wing columnist, there's about 5 in every issue.
Yeah.
So they tell you they're giving you both sides, but the other thing, one of the problems with media too is where they get their advertising money. And we, the taxpayers, have sat down, when I first interested in politics, the government didn't buy ads, but now the average, if you check sometimes, see, especially a weekly paper, how many ads are in there from the government. You know, to buy this, or to go here, register there, and so on and so forth. And the department, there's a big map showing where you can hunt.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, the average person in Calgary doesn't go out to shoot moose out
Yeah.
there, you know, but there's a big ad there showing that. And that comes from the provincial government. And so when you total up how much money goes into a newspaper, particularly a weekly one, coming in from government ads, the government says they have to do that. They got to inform you.
Well, I'd like to get your take on these Canadian action plans that are, like, there was literally one right outside the door here, and they're everywhere. You can't go to a pool. The Canadian Action Plan, Harper's
Oh, yeah.
sign basically
Yeah.
saying, we put
Yeah.
federal money here. This is our government's doing. When, like, you kind of alluded to this with Al Dewar and Dave Braconier, when the bottom line is that you're actually doing a job, and sometimes the next government gets credit for whatever the previous government did. And, you know, when the federal government actually does its job, that doesn't mean that they should be putting up a Canadian Action Plan sign saying, look, we actually did something, even though we take a huge chunk of your check every single time. You know, oh, look, we did something with it. Well, but how are they even getting away with spending all of this money on these Canadian action plans when really, what are those? Those are literally conservative ads right there. So I get really
And
upset.
you have to keep it up for so long. It's written right into the grant.
Yeah, it's a tough, that's a tough.
And some
deal.
hold their nose and do it and kind of hide it. He happens to be conservative, so you know.
It's right out in the
center.
front. Yeah,
But
it's
she brings up a good point
I
there.
I didn't see it. They've actually done research on that, and people at this point have tweeted videos, thankfully.
Yeah, they have,
Because
it's
people
been
are-
there for so
The only thing
long.
that people are asking is, how much is this actually costing?
Yeah.
I actually did an ad right in front of it with Josh Blakeney from Press TV because it just burns my butt because I have to look at this when I drive down the street. So,
Well,
you-
the worst part is, well, you see the sign, it's the fact that somebody got paid to put the sign
Sign
there.
up. Oh,
Somebody
yes.
got paid to paint the sign. Somebody
it's a
got
US
paid to
company.
design
Yeah,
the
it's a
sign.
company.
And so they're all going to push it.
sorry, can you say that
It's a
again?
US company.
The US
she said.
company actually got the contracts for a lot of the signs.
It's a U.S. company.
Wow.
That just is salt on the wound right there.
Yeah, no
But you
kidding.
bring up a very tough subject because I've been on both the opposition and the government. You raise hell when you're in opposition with the government putting ads out there to Tories, damn the Tories for doing this and so on. So then you get in power
Right.
and that legislation's still there. And it's hard as hell to talk your caucus into,
No, we're lucky.
no, don't advertise anymore. They'll say, well, Tories did it the last 8 years or last 4 years. All we want to do is get even.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
goes on and on and on.
Well,
And
we're
then the
luckier,
media-
we match the flag.
Yeah, but then the media is sitting there, Southern Press or whoever it is, is saying, yes, you've got to inform the public, yeah, definitely, you can't keep them in the dark, you have to.
Okay, I have some more questions. I didn't
But
want to dominate.
Bob mentioned proportional representation too.
Yeah.
The fair vote kind of thing. It goes a little bit with the two terms. You know, there's got to be some changes made, and proportional representation is, to me, much more of a solution. Things like a 2-year term are still band-aiding things. So I actually believe in, but it's going to take courage to vote yourself out.
Stefan Dion has some really great policies on proportional representation that I'm really liking. I try to put it out there, but I don't get a lot of feedback on them. So my hope is that people are starting to pay attention to it so that it can be changed. But I do believe that, you know, we have been talking about it, that some people will be okay with it. The problem is that I need people who may not say I'm a self-identified liberal to become liberals so that you can vote on our policy. Because if you don't, then, you know, it's like the voting system we have now. If you don't go to the vote, you know, the Conservatives get in. Well, here we have a situation where the party can change their policy, but we need people to get engaged and do the vote with us. Even for myself, I've been working with the Liberals since the last election, and just seeing this slow, long, tedious system that they have within the party, where you have to join, you have to get onto the executive, you have to work at getting the policy, you have to get the policy going, you have to go to the convention so you can vote on the policy. So like it's a long, drawn-out process. So as a person, I'm just a pissed off taxpayer who ended up saying, okay, look, I'll have to become a liberal in order to make some change. I have to go through all of this. So we have some really great organizations like the Council of Canadians, a fair vote, but we need these members to get engaged with the system so that we can change the policy. And I'm trying to tell that for the Aboriginals, especially, because it was a long, hard work to get the vote. It was hard for women, and then it was hard for Aboriginals. So for me, I feel I absolutely have to vote. But we have a huge Aboriginal population in our riding that just doesn't vote. So I'm trying to inspire them to realize that if you don't vote, you can't change the politics, but the politics will change you and change how you're affected. Well, it's the same thing here now with Liberal policy. I would love to have proportional representation, but if we have a majority of Liberals in the party who go to the convention and vote and say, no, we like the status quo because we want to stay in power, their vote is going to win.
Takes courage.
So that's why we're going to need more people to say, yes, I'm going to join the Liberals, so that, yes, I can be a part of that policy vote to say, yes, I agree with proportional representation.
I was hoping BC was going to lead the way, because I think if it had gone through it in BC, it eventually over years would have trickled across the country. And I don't know if they'll try it again. Twice was,
Tried it twice,
yeah.
We had it in Alberta until 1955, and Premier Manning of that day got a hell of a scare. The Liberals coming within, with official opposition, came within 5% of winning, so they abolished it.
That was Ernest Manning.
Yeah. So, trouble with it, first of all, there's two problems with proportional representation. You can put it in, you can put it out. If you believe in the supremacy of Parliament or supremacy of the legislature, they can take it out and put it in, change it. So it's pretty hard to make it a constitutional change, which would need 2/3. There is a type of PR around some spots in the world I really like, is what you call a single transferable. In other words, you only transfer the bottom transfer once, because on a PR system, you keep transferring and knocking off the bottom one until the top one gets 50%. Well, the trouble with that is that you would then end up with a multitude of parties, like you have in Israel, for instance. I've worked in Israel. And there, if you get 5% of the vote, you can elect an MP. Well, what you have is everybody says, well, why vote Liberal or Conservative? I got the free thinkers of East Calgary.
Right.
We could get 5% the way you run. So you have to work out a system. Australians have tried it. I was there last year on a commission, and they have PR, proportional representation, which seems to be working all right because they only transfer once, maybe twice, so that the winner gets 50%. But what happens then is that the parties appoint everybody, the candidate. You lose your direct vote because the proportional representation, Liberals, Conservatives, or the free thinkers, whatever percentage they have, they'll have the percentage of MPs. And so you end up then, who picks those MPs?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the party does it because the party president, of course, says, I. Then if it turns out that you got the right to 20, there was 100 MPs, and you got 20% of the vote, you should have 20 MPs. Well, who selects the 20 MPs? The party.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's somehow that's hard to get around. That's the big trouble they had in Australia. And what happens then when you get proportional representation like that in Australia? Australia's changed prime ministers 3 times in the last 2 years because the vote's so close in the House all the time.
But wasn't that
Creates
also
a problem.
within the same party? Didn't they vote out? So it wasn't a proportional representation issue, I thought.
Yeah, well, they have a fight within the party, see?
Yeah,
That's the trouble with PR, if you could have it.
that can happen here too.
Huh?
That can happen here too.
Yeah. Well, in England,
Change the leader.
the caucus elects a leader.
Yeah.
Here we have the party electing a leader. In the U.S., the primary elects the leader.
Right.
And Justin Trudeau is trying to go to the primary system, trying to get everybody.
To get more
Well-
active participation.
Pardon?
To get more active participation across the country.
Yeah, I like it. Do
Yeah.
you? I
So-
think it's a step in the right
One
direction.
thing about the
Except I
Herald.
don't want violence for
There's
10
been an
years.
article on
Yeah.
Trudeau, and the Herald is biased.
Oh, yeah.
I glanced at it and I didn't agree
But they're
with it.
covering him.
Yeah, but it was a letter and it wasn't a nice letter, so the Herald is biased.
Oh, yeah.
It seems Alberta is biased.
Yeah.
I find with the Herald that I stopped my subscription because I think I looked from 1 year out of newspaper 1 year back, and it was essentially the same article. And, it almost seems like they follow a template.
Well, Josipa, who used to, she ran here, worked for them, and they were very biased about what they would pick and choose from. So there is so much bias in this media. I know for myself, I'm going, if I'm looking nationally, then I'm looking at The Hill or something like that to read from them. Maybe the Globe and Mail. Sometimes it's, balanced, sometimes not so much. But, it's really sad that out here in Calgary, I mean, I was born in Calgary, I've been in Alberta my whole life. I know the news I'm getting here is so badly filtered. I mean, I can't even read it anymore. I can't even watch half of the news. I turn on the radio and I'll hear something and I just turn it off right away. I just, if it's not on Public or the CBC, I just keep it off because I don't even want my daughter exposed to their ads and their propaganda. It's awful.
But
So
there's a reporter, and I remember the story. Ralph told him, he wrote kind of a negative article, and you were talking to him, and I remember this conversation. He said, Ralph said, report something like that again, you're fired. And don't think I can't get you fired instantly.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Really, hey?
He told that to
Well,
the
he
reporter.
basically said I wouldn't give your paper any news,
wow.
and that's their business.
So
He started that.
Let me ask a question out there. To get more participation, you need more votes,
Yeah.
more people voting.
How do I
What would
inspire?
an email voting, what would that, they do it, all the corporations do it now for shareholders.
Yeah.
Would that increase
Well, I think somebody
would
suggested.
youth get out and vote
Yeah.
more?
I
Twitter
think so.
vote.
Yeah.
Twitter vote.
It's an ableism issue though as well.
Pardon?
Like it's an ableism issue as well because you have a lot of seniors that just are not mobile.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
yeah.
so I would like to go that way, and like I was happy to hear you say that even though what happened to you, you're still
But
for.
Oh, yeah.
You've been a poll captain, you've been sitting at the poll when you've seen seniors coming in there in their walkers and their wheelchairs.
Exactly. Like this
Yeah.
is an ableism issue, and we
You
could
can
get
give
more
You
votes.
could give a youth a Cadillac and they still wouldn't vote. So, but they, just wondering if,
Might if it was
just
a
wondering
convertible.
if they did, but email electronic wise, whether that would be a turn on.
I don't know.
But I think there's got to be issues that excite them,
Pardon?
or a candidate that excites them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was part of Barack Obama's success, was just, he inspired a wide range of people who
Yeah.
were willing to get off their butts.
Well,
and
Nancy too.
Participate, and Nancy as well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
I think
well,
Nancy's going to get some youth out with some of his ideas for voting. I think he is going to
For
get.
civic politics.
Yeah, for city
not
politics.
for national or.
Well, when this new, there's two of them, my mind is slipped on. Then she used it, this new one
It's got one, it's called Vote Pledge.
Well, no, when you're talking to each other on the.
Twitter.
Twitter.
Huh?
Twitter,
Tweeting.
Yeah.
Twitter.
tweeting,
Yeah, as well as, yeah,
Facebook
with
and stuff.
is that going to help?
He
Well,
uses
It's just
Twitter
come out,
well.
it's just come out, it just caught fire the last year and a half or
That's
so.
what, that's also 3 years ago is when tweeting.
Pardon?
About 3 years ago is when tweeting really started taking off, and he was one of the first.
When Nancy
discussers.
used it.
Yeah,
Yes.
he used it.
And Obama
And,
did too.
and Obama as
And
well.
Obama. Will it take off? Will that increase?
Now there's a lot of tweets out there, so it gets mumbled. But
Yeah.
what happens with tweeting is that you become a follower, and then you can be updated very quickly.
Yeah,
You know,
but you-
so
but
as
you-
long as you are signed up to follow the person, you can get them your.
But you could combine tweets with voting with email with that.
No, it's interesting how you vote for, like, the celebrities, you know, they have, you vote for the celebrities, and, I mean, you send in 20 votes, you know, you're
Yeah.
able to do that, you know, so they really have to look at the technical side of it to make sure you only can vote once, but then you've got 6 people in your house probably voting from the same computer, so they've got to be able to
Oh, you
to
can,
do
yeah, you
something.
can track IP
Yeah.
addresses.
Nancy was tweeting a lot during the flood, and I guess there was a concerted effort to have Nancy take a nap.
Yeah. And actually, I was a part of the Alberta Liberal Party's last leadership election, and they actually they mailed you your like voter ID, so that way you could just vote from home, the leader. And, you know,
With the national.
yeah, so maybe we could do that in other capacities as well. So I think it can be there. But one last thing I want to ask you before we wrap up is, especially with the municipal election, the numbers are just coming out on how poorly women are represented. I want to ask you both, what are your thoughts on how are we going to get more women to run in politics? And just as a caveat, I just wanted to say I walked out my door grateful my daughter wasn't looking at me because I don't usually wear makeup and I don't usually wear this dress and I don't, all these things.
Yeah.
And it came out today how many women are not, in politics and how our looks are more of a focus point than, our politics, what we actually have to say. And I felt like a hypocrite walking out the door, putting on hair, makeup, and all of this, and grateful my daughter wasn't looking at me because here I am, a girl in politics, and I feel like, well, there's still that standard. I'm going to be meeting Nick Taylor, so I really should look my best and such. And then I was mad at myself. I was mad at myself for even doing that. But so anyway, what are your thoughts
But
on
you look
that?
good for yourself. Women in politics it's a tough. I know that the commission, the Liberal Women's Commission, have talked about how to get women in politics. And I mentioned earlier that the further you are away from your constituents, it's actually easier on your life. because when you are close to your constituents, you're literally a phone call away. Now, I can't, with the email and Facebook and Twittering now, I can see that that's going to be closing in too, so it would be harder. I didn't start getting into politics until my oldest was in grade 11. So that made a huge difference. I don't know, there was one of our trustees, she had an 8-year-old. It worked as a trustee because it was still a part-time, considered a part-time job. I probably spent anywhere from 60 to 70 hours a week, but it was still considered a part-time job. But I think that's one of the reasons women don't run, is because it's no different than volunteer. You get eaten up by an issue or a passion or something or other, and the same thing happens. I don't know whether women tend to, that happens more. I really don't know, but I did look at it about, my kids were older. I wanted to make a difference. I moved that direction. If they were younger, I don't know if I would have done it. And that's just something the women have to go through.
I must admit though, some weeks I'd see her, Sunday night I'd talk to her, wouldn't talk to her till Saturday morning.
Wow.
Because I would go to work early, she'd be sleeping, she'd be out, I'd be sleeping every night. Wouldn't say a word because her schedule is different than mine with the Alderman.
Yep.
So there was weeks where the whole week could go by, I'd have to phone her up on the phone and say, what are you doing? Yeah, seriously.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
it does affect family life, so that's a gender issue.
Yep.
In this day, it shouldn't be, but in this day, it still is. And this would have been quite a while ago. There's some changes. I know families sometimes are a different makeup. There's much more equal kind of workload and that sort of thing. And also women will tend to say, it's not the politics I want to work on an issue. And so they have the opportunity to work on issues outside of politics. And they say, oh, I want to go where the work is actually done, and forget this. And so that's another mindset.
Yep. And I can understand that firsthand, where I'm like, I want change, so this is what I'll do. I'm president in the party just because now I'm seeing how the whole system actually works. But, I want positive representation of Aboriginal, so I'm working with 12 CSI happily.
Yeah, and I haven't stopped working for my community.
Yeah.
In fact, in a lot of ways, I'm probably doing about 25% of what I did as a council member, and just in the background.
Yep.
I think first started in politics in the 1940s after the war, so I think the only thing limiting women now, they're considered to be just as smart, just as aggressive, and just as mean. And when I first got into politics, they said, we need a lot more women, and all you men are getting us into wars all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got Goldermeyer, Mrs. Candy, and a few others that put an end to that argument, because they were the worst warriors you could get. So the only thing that's limiting women today, and you've already touched on, is the domestic setup. That's within your own family, with your own.
Why do you think?
How you work it.
It's very rewarding.
Well, there should be some ways I think that make it easier. For instance, the home care and the child care facilities should all be equal, because women, whether, I don't think we'll ever change it, will probably be the primary force in your homes and your children for at least a generation or two yet. I don't think it'll change. So therefore, the more we can make it easier for women to run the business, the men can leave from their business, or if they're lawyer, they can continue in politics and law. And I was a consulting engineer, I could do both politics and engineering. So women have to be able to there has to be enough aid out there in the community to make your load at home light enough so that you can participate. And we're moving in that direction. What do we have? Parliament and legislatures now are about 35% women. So that's, when I first started politics, it was only 10%.
It was interesting, one of the first, I'm a public school, a public health nurse, that's what my training background is. And we had to do, essay, and we had to do a little bit of a project and that sort of thing. And one of it was on actually childcare. Childcare is the home important, or, having, the bottom, you assume, and it was always an assumption that childcare is better at home. So mom's better to stay at home. But even in those days, I mean, this is in the 60s, that after our research, there was a team of us, and we basically said, no, it's the quality of care, not necessarily the quantity of care by the parents. It's the quality of care that it still comes down to. So a daycare was still okay as long as they got quality of care.
What do you think of the city council and the legislature and the federal parliament had free childcare when you're in meetings?
Meetings and stuff like that, yeah.
You did like that?
Should be a
That'd be a
must.
step in the right direction.
I don't know whether free childcare, but having proper childcare. Like that's part of the problem federally. Even one of the issues is our childcare workers are just not. They're not
paid.
valued. They're not valued at all.
Mind you, if you can get a childcare worker that's a senior hockey player, you can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well-
Remember the last lieutenant governor we had, she looks forward to the day when a teacher will get half as much money as a hockey player.
Oh.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for coming, and I wanted to give you both one of these, the flood of 2013.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And so here's a bag for you, and here's one for you too, Diane.
I was almost going to go buy one.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I'm glad I beat you to it.
She's been white hatting the speakers with.
I think-
I did, but I ran out of the chocolate,
Chocolates.
and then I thought,
Why
well,
not?
I better not give it to you, because then, I
Oh, we'll
don't
get
want to
mad
tempt
'cause we don't
art.
want.
Right? So I'm like, okay.
We
But then I
shouldn't
came
be
across
having-
this, and I
Very
thought that was the
Oh,
perfect
yeah,
thing.
no,
I
this
want it
is
autographed
Yeah, no, thank
This
you.
is nice.
You want it autographed?
by you.
Yeah.
You give it.
Our
we
future here.
Given by the Calgary Herald, and after we give them all this help.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Is it actually
It's
published?
helpful criticism.
Pardon?
It's helpful criticism.
Yeah. Constructive.
This goes to the
Yeah,
building
constructive
fund, though.
criticism,
Yeah.
that's the word.
I have to ask myself when I get all frustrated, what other countries in the world would I like to live in for democracy? And I can't really think of any, even the US.
Like Churchill said, this lousy system, but it's the best known.
Yeah. Yeah.
But sure, there's no doubt we have a generation that doesn't want to vote. I'd like to try that
I need
email.
chocolate.
What you're saying about childcare, I just recently read in the Monitor, which is put out by the CCPA, Canada has the lowest accessibility rate for childcare of any country in the OECD.
Presented on. Yeah. Well, we
Well,
we
thank you,
don't
Michelle.
value
No,
childcare.
thank you.
At all.
No,
Reading the story in the news this week about the community group that wants to block childcare from being established adjacent to their neighborhood.
Oh, I couldn't believe
I can't
that.
believe that. It's just shameful.
Oh.
Yeah. It's
I thought, what a wonderful thing to have in your neighborhood, and they're trying to block it.
What area was that?
I'm not sure which neighborhood it is.
Yeah.
But, they're signing petitions to say that.
Rich homes.
It's a discretionary use in the zoning, and it is a commercial zone.
And I hope the council had the guts to pass it, because they could.
I hope, well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure where it's ended up, but.
I think they need copies of this, who signed it in the newspaper. That would straighten them out.
It just
Well,
seems.
I come from a small town, and the same thing.
Thank you.
happened.
I feel like I should have gotten Nenshi to sign up for you
30
guys.
years ago with, a home for people with mental
You think
disabilities.
Nancy's living?
And they said, and they
I
went,
think
oh
I
my
think so,
goodness.
yeah.
They ended up being next to my piano teacher.
Pardon?
If he doesn't win, I hope I can get him to run for us. Because he actually grew up in Forest Lawn. His parents, yeah, his parents own the,
You know,
And it's healthy.
was that Forest Dry, the washing machine place, right on Forest Lawn.
Having to-
Oh,
write
Yeah.
a petition to get.
So he's right from our area.
Yeah.
Daycare.
We were talking, you were talking about the votes though, and I don't know which group has come out that they have using technology.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming, using the technology to do all the.
See you later.
And one of the things that came out was that our incumbent council member has voted 100% of the time against any motion that requires money.
Oh.
There's no balance there.
Mhm.
That just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
It costs money to run a city.
Yeah.
And you've got to look, the city is a living entity.
Yeah.
Maybe not in terms of biological, but it's a living entity. These things are going to have to be replaced. Things are going to, things are not going to work. Some things work great. But you have to make it a place where people want to live. I find it interesting that they had a questionnaire here in Alberta because there was a poll done, I think, or released about a week ago, asking, well, why do people come and work in Alberta, then they leave, like to go back home? And it's sort of like, why do you have to ask that question?
Back home in Canada?
Yeah, back another
Yeah.
place, like back east.
Maritime.
Maritime, oh, everywhere outside of BC.
Yeah.
And it generally means it's lifestyle. You know, people have a connection to their home. And, but anyways, it kind of goes back to being part of a community. And I just sensed when I moved here about 8 years ago that you're very isolated. Eventually you start to meet a couple of people in your neighborhood. But I mean, when they joke, oh wow, you're a native Calgarian, that's unusual. That says something about the community.
Yeah, we're definitely diverse.
Transient is almost a good word for it. So that may also, deal with participation here, when you don't feel like you belong.
Yeah. Well, I've been here for almost 40 years, so.
Where'd you come from?
I'm an
40 years?
army brat.
That's old, you're
I'm
not
an
that
army
old.
brat.
Huh?
I'm an army
Army brat.